Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lissy Medvedev, Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy. On behalf of Abby Fingo, our fabulous administrative assistant, and Professor Dan Kemstrom over here, our faculty director, welcome to BC Law for some of you, and welcome back to many of you. Today's recorded, please note recorded program, Lawyering in the Age of Climate Change, kicks off the Rappaport Center's academic year, and I'm especially delighted that the program is being co-sponsored by the BC Asian Pacific Law Students Association, the Black Law Students Association, the Children's Rights Group, the Environmental Law Society of Lahanis, and the Middle Eastern Law Students Association. For those of you who don't know us, the Rappaport Center promotes public policy, public service, and the intersection thereof through programming and a unique summer fellowship. We bring the coolest, smartest, most innovative people, policymakers, public officials, practitioners, and scholars. Case in point today with our special guest, Elizabeth Yeampierre, whom I will introduce shortly, to BC Law School to talk about critical and timely public policy issues, including criminal justice, domestic violence, transgender rights, race and wrongful convictions, immigration, and public education, just to highlight a few of the programs we held last year. For the fellowship program, we select 12 law students from law schools across Massachusetts. If you're passionate about public service and are awarded a fellowship, we provide a $10,000 stipend to work in a state or local government office for the summer. Yes, 10,000, I saw some eyebrows raised, mentoring and experiential programming. If you want to learn about the fellowship program and how to apply, we will be holding a presentation in conjunction with the BC Law Career Services on November 6th here at the law school. Watch for the announcement. For today, in thinking about how to launch this academic year, we wanted to take on climate justice, an issue that affects every one of us, and some, particularly in Black and Brown communities, more than others. Although perhaps overused as a phrase, many of us really do agree that climate justice is the existential crisis of our time. We were hoping to find a lawyer doing cutting-edge work, particularly from the lens of racial justice. And after reaching out to many people, all who know far more than I, our very own former Rappaport Center colleague, Cindy Wynn, directed me to Elizabeth Yeampierre, the first of two Rappaport Senior Fellows who will be here at BC Law School this fall. Let me tell you about Elizabeth. She is an internationally recognized Puerto Rican environmental climate justice leader of African and Indigenous ancestry, born and raised in New York City. She is co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, a national frontline-led organization, and executive director of UPROSE, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. She was the first Latina chair of the US EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and one of the opening speakers at President Obama's first White House Environmental Justice Forum. She has been featured in the New York Times as a visionary, named by Apolitical as one of the world's most influential people in climate policy, and featured in Vogue as one of 13 climate warriors in the world, a climate warrior, very cool. She has numerous other honors, too many to name here. But before I can hand over the microphone to Elizabeth, I have to tell you about the Rappaport Center's programming for this semester because that's my job. So here goes. In 2 days on Thursday, Elizabeth will be a panelist at our program showcasing, quote, frontline solutions towards a just transition. We're very excited that the inaugural Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity for the Commonwealth, Maria Belaine Power, will be joining us, along with Dwayne Tyndall, Executive Director of ACE, Alternatives for Community and Environment, an organization that was started right here at BC Law School. Penn Lowe, a professor at Tufts in the Department of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning is moderating the program. And lunch, all important lunch, is being provided on Thursday by Anna's Taqueria. And for those of you new to our programs, you will know that I always say this, please register. I really hate to run out of food, and everyone is always mad at me when we run out of food, so please register. For the program after that on September 24th, how many of you know about Civil Gideon and the ongoing struggle to ensure free legal services in civil matters? Imagine, among other horrific outcomes, losing your home, your children, or being deported without a lawyer. Join us to learn about what's happening with Civil Gideon initiatives in family law, juvenile law, immigration, and housing. And then, in light of the impending election, yes, we have a big election happening in November. So on October 1st and October 8th, we'll be welcoming our second Rappaport Senior Fellow, Yeampierre Nadeau, Council of Protect Democracy, across the ideological nonpartisan organization. She was previously chief of the Civil Rights Division of the State AG's office. Yeampierre will be giving a community address on October 1st entitled Preserving Democracy after the 2024 election. And on October 8th, we'll be holding a full program addressing from election day to inauguration, securing a peaceful transition of power, with, among other panelists, the former acting Secretary of State for Pennsylvania. But first, for those of you who are registered to vote here in Massachusetts, I do want to point out today is primary day in some of our communities. I voted this morning, and even though law school is undoubtedly all-encompassing, if you are registered to vote and there is a primary in your jurisdiction, please vote today. It really is the greatest privilege of our democracy. We'll have a mystery program on October 29th, so stay tuned for that one. I'm not divulging. And we're going to end the semester with a full afternoon symposium on Friday, November 15th. And that is on re-entry of formerly incarcerated individuals. For that symposium, we'll have two panels. The first composed of public officials, including so far the Commissioner of Probation and the Undersecretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. That's moderated by the Chief Counsel of CPCS, the Committee for Public Counsel Services, which is the state's public defender agency. The second panel will be composed of formerly incarcerated individuals. One of them is currently participating in the BC Prison Education Program, as well as other on-the-ground folks in the nonprofit and public sectors who are working to find housing, jobs, and provide education for formerly incarcerated individuals. So it is going to be a fabulous semester for all of you, I hope, and for the Rappaport Center and all of us here. I hope to see you on Thursday, and for as many of the upcoming Rappaport Center programs as you can attend. And now, finally, it is time to be inspired by Elizabeth Yeampierre, Executive Director of UPROSE and our 2024 Rappaport Senior Fellow. If you think you'd like to meet with Elizabeth, we have office hours that were provided in a link that I sent out to everyone on Friday. So check this past Friday's email. She has office hours available. And now, thank you, Elizabeth. Please join me in welcoming her.
It is wonderful to be here with you today. I haven't spoken to a group of lawyers in a very long time. And I want to thank Lizzie, Abigail, and everyone who has made it possible for me not only to be here, but has welcomed me in such a warm way. This is a scary time that we're living in right now. I think of myself more as an organizer than as a lawyer. I stopped organizing, I think when my son was about, I stopped being an attorney, practicing attorney around, I don't know, my son was about 4 years old. I just want to share with you a little bit about my organization and the two organizations that I represent. UPROSE is an organization that is based in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Anybody here from Brooklyn? Okay. Whoever is here from Brooklyn, you know you're going to represent art. Anybody here from Balsa? I was a member of Balsa back in 1983. I was very proud. as Puerto Rican of African and indigenous ancestry. My grandfather was from Haiti and came into Puerto Rico through Vieques. It was really wonderful to be as melanin challenged as I am and to be welcomed with so much love by Balsa back in the day. So I'm happy to be here with you. UPROSE is an organization that has been around since 1966. It was founded during the Civil Rights Movement. And I came in 1998 and changed the organization from being a social service organization to one that was serving the unmet needs of the community. And at that time, it was environmental justice. People were complaining that they couldn't breathe. They were living right under a highway, right next to power plants, next to marine transfer stations, all of the infrastructure that communities of color become the reluctant host to. And so I didn't have a background in doing any kind of environmental work. I was a civil rights litigator who was really happy just suing cops in New York and New Jersey and organizing around police brutality and racial violence, the kind that existed during the Giuliani days in New York City. But the community said that their priority was the ability to breathe. And so that's how I got into the environmental justice movement. And I come from that background. I come from struggle. I come from a community, a family of people who have lost their lives because of their inability to breathe. In the time that I've been at UPROSE, we have doubled the amount of open space. We've stopped the siting of a power plant that would have been the size of 520 megawatts, the size of 3 football fields. We reduced tons and tons of emissions. We're now getting ready to launch the first community-owned solar array in New York City. We were able, as a result of fighting an industrial partner in Sunset Park, an industrial developer that wanted to reclaim the industrial sector, we were able to defeat their zoning application, and now we've got offshore wind at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. We've had 8 climate justice youth summits, the largest gatherings of young people of color on climate change in the country. And still, we're a grassroots organization that is intergenerational, matriarchal, and leaderful, working from the ground up, getting our marching orders from our community. We consider ourselves people that are staffing the people, and not people who are determining what the solutions are or what the priorities are for our community. We're there to staff them while they're working, while they've got 2 or 3 jobs, while they're raising 2 or 3 children. That's how I see lawyering. I see lawyering as very different than the way lawyering has manifested in our communities. And so here we are in this moment where everything that we breathe, wear, feel, everything from our bodies to our uterus, our homes, our gender, our oceans, water, education, travel, infrastructure, animals, relationships, and love is regulated. Every single aspect of your life is affected by law, which I think is one of the reasons maybe that you went to law school. With me, it was that less than 2% of my community had a legal education. And so having access to legal education meant having access to power. And so what does climate change do to all of those things? It is, and it has been disrupting it. It is disrupting every aspect of our lives. Regardless of what discipline you're in, regardless of what your intention is in terms of how you use your legal education, it is going to be shaped and informed and disrupted by climate change. And so every single little thing and every big thing, all of it will be disrupted, but we're not all experiencing it the same way. And we know that lawyers, right? Lawyers are the guardians of extraction, of capitalism. They navigate in the systems responsible for creating these conditions. And so you need to know that history and the role that lawyers have played. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be the Puerto Rican Thurgood Marshall. That was my dream. I wanted to be Thurgood Marshall because I lived in a house where Black was beautiful, where we talked about Stokely Carmichael, where Puerto Ricans, and maybe that's a uniquely New York City experience of growing up with people that we considered to be another part of the African diaspora. They simply spoke another language, but we felt like we were part of something bigger, and that we were part of this diaspora that existed all over the United States, and these were our people. And so, as a child, I was angered in understanding the role of the civil rights movement being taught to be pro-Black, and being taught also that we owed everything that we had as Puerto Ricans to the Black community. That without them, we wouldn't have any rights. That without them, we would be able to have the homes that we had or access to the resources. So I want to say a nod to all of you who have benefited from the struggle and the blood and the sacrifice of Black Americans in this country, that you have a nod as you come out, whether you're coming from another country or whether you were born and raised here, that you always recognize that you owe that, all of that, to the Black community in this country. Because I don't think they get the love and the respect and the opportunities that their sacrifice created. So that's kind of how my grounding was. And so I want to be a Puerto Rican Thurgood Marshal, and then I become an attorney at the time that Reagan packs the courts with right-wing judges, which means I have to become a different kind of attorney, because all of a sudden what we're experiencing is a civil rights rollback. A civil rights rollback that then is not corrected by Clinton or the Obamas, because in the lower courts, they're appointing centrist judges, right? And so we're seeing a civil rights rollback happening in every aspect of our life, starting in the 80s to now, where I hear on the way over here that MIT has just admitted probably 50% less Black and Latino students than they have had before. And I wouldn't be here talking to you if there had not been affirmative action. I would not have had the opportunity to stop the siting of a power plant, double the amount of open space, send 4 young people to Antarctica and 3 to the North Pole, played a role of passing the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in New York and helped organize the largest coalition in the state of New York that gave birth to the most aggressive climate legislation that was then used by the federal government to create Justice 40. I would not have been in that space if it had not been for affirmative action. Because I come from struggle, and I was the first in my family to go to college and to law school. And so when I was looked at, I was seeing through people having deficit-based expectations of me and not seeing the power that lived in a little girl who did not speak because she was observing everything. So you and MIT, and I understand that diversity is different, that's a good thing. Those students will not have the benefit of having the experience of learning from other young people who will ground what they're learning in the classroom. They will not benefit from that experience. They will have a very homogenized, narrow experience as a result of the evisceration of affirmative action. And what does this have to do with climate change? Well, everything, right? Because you're talking about a movement that is made up of people of color and people who come from the front line, like the Climate Justice Alliance that has members from Puerto Rico all the way to Guam. Frontline leadership that is moving away from extraction and trying and working to operationalize a just transition. And what does that mean? That means needing to understand engineering, science, knowing how to measure air quality, needing to make sure that we're fighting against the false solutions that are being pushed by the big greens and big organizations that are greenwashing the work that we're trying to do on the ground. That means that those of us who come from extraction, who are the descendants of enslavement and colonialism, are leading this fight. And colonialism and extraction is at the heart of how decisions are made in the United States. And so for us, we can easily connect the dots between the root causes of climate change and the impacts on our bodies and our local environment. And we have a visionary systemic change that is required. We have a vision that we call a just transition to move us away from the extractive economy. In the climate justice movement, we say that transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so even the language that you're learning, everything that you read, is really about how we need to transition, create a green economy, and have sustainability. But sustainability can exist without justice, and we can have a green economy that is a mirror of the economy we have now, a green patina that doesn't address the process that got us here, or how we're going to build the kind of society that we believe is centered on justice, on racial justice and equity. And one can't happen without the other. Climate justice is one of those terms that people have picked up, and appropriate it, right? Like they appropriate hip hop and they appropriate language and its systems and the work that comes out of the people most impacted, and they own it without giving credit or without honoring its intention. And it is meaningless if people don't understand that both the environmental justice and the climate justice movements were created so that people could speak for themselves. And that is hard for lawyers, because we become lawyers because we think, one, that we're smart, that we can change things, that we have access to this body of information that makes us particularly special. But climate change now is demanding a different kind of lawyer. And so you have to determine what kind of lawyer you want to be. And just as I had to be different because the Reagan administration made it so we had to be different, when we realized that we had to adjudicate claims on the street and we can no longer go to court, climate change is also demanding a different kind of lawyer. And no matter what your rhetoric is, and no matter what you think your principles are, when you come into a room and people say the lawyer showed up, you puff up and you think, yeah, I'm the lawyer, I'm the badass in the room. But the real badass in the room who's a lawyer is the one who is able to listen and provide technical support to the people that are asking you for support and don't believe that you lead, that you speak for, that you supplant, or that you are the one with the best decisions. The real lawyer is the creative, the one that is looking at how everything is impacted by climate change, right? So we were taught that climate change really kind of starts around the Industrial Revolution. And that's a really good narrative, because what it does is it deflects blame from what really happens, which is, in my view, and not a whole lot of people, this is my view, some people may share it, but I really do believe that climate change begins with the extraction of our nations, of our land, of our resources, and of our bodies. In the slave quarters, when black people did not have access to good food, when they didn't have access to health care, that's an environmental justice issue. It starts, in my view, way back then, and it manifests right now as the angry child of that history of exploitation, disruption of our ecosystems, and the takings of our land. And so that's what we're living in today. And so we can't replicate those models that we learned. And so you're in class and you're going to be learning about torts, about constitutional law, and you're going to work at a pace that makes the privileged comfortable. Remember what happened during the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement literally moved at that pace. How do we make the privileged comfortable? And in the process of making the privileged comfortable, people died. People disappeared. Couldn't document it like we can document it today, right? And so the cost of moving at that pace costs us lives. And so it's a pace that we're seeing even right now while the climate change conversation is taking place. All of a sudden you see the Democratic nominee talking about fracking. All of a sudden fracking is okay, right? Those compromises that are being made at the expense of our lives, because if you're in LA, fracking is happening, and if you're a black or brown person in LA, fracking is happening in your backyard. So what do the lawyers do? Right? Lawyers have been working on everything from regulations to suing corporations to compromising our rights at COP, right? Because we know the Paris Agreement is not legally binding, and we know that the COP really compromises and is complicit in undermining the global south. So these are these spaces that have been created where lawyers are present, where they're developing agreements, where they're drafting documents, where they're doing research and trying to figure out how do we move the dial, and how do we do it without upsetting the people who really control our country, really control the economy, and save a few lives in the process. And climate change is just changing all of that. It's going to demand that we have big ovaries, and that we really come to this in a very creative way. We do things in the climate justice movement that have never been done before, and we don't stop doing them just because it hasn't been done. So the community-owned solar array that is going up in Sunset Park, we didn't know how to do the financing, how to create the governance model. We just had a vision, and we put people together to help co-create it. And then we brought on lawyers to help us figure out how do we draw up these agreements, how do we make sure that this community owns this array in perpetuity, what does that look like? And they come in not knowing, not even knowing where to start. So you're being expected to be really creative. You're also being expected, and I'm going completely off my talk here, you're also going to be expected to know how to work with people and recognize that some people who don't have access to a formal education, who maybe never went to school, may know more than you do about what they need and what needs to happen, and that your responsibility is to provide them with access to the resources to make that happen. And we're living also in this time where because you're here, it means that you're competitive. And climate change is demanding that you lean away, that you move away from competition and lean into deep collaboration and deep solidarity, that we build with each other. And what do we find? Every 5 minutes, a new alliance, a new coalition, a new organization from somebody who thinks they have a new idea, gets created, applies for funding, and you're seeing a lot of tension between groups. Not really thinking about how we allocate resources in a strategic way to hold this moment. You see it with young people. Well, if you know anything about the role of young people in movements, then you know that the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the American Indian movement, that the Civil Rights movement, that Black Lives Matter, that Standing Rock, that all of those were held by young people of color who put their lives on the line and spilled blood so that we could be here today. So, for example, no diss. But when Sunrise comes along and determines that all of a sudden youth are leading the climate movement and that they're concerned, we lean back and we're like, wait a minute. Young people of color from environmental justice communities have been holding it down for a minute because our communities are the ones who can't breathe. And so what should Sunrise have done? They should have done what I'm going to ask you to do. They should have done some landscaping, and they should have done some power mapping. And they should have said, instead of helicoptering into communities that already have environmental justice and climate justice leadership, we need to make sure that we're in West Texas, that we're in places where there's no climate consciousness, and that we're organizing there. So that we're not duplicating work, we're not supplanting leadership, we're not competing with limited resources, but we are working as allies, and we're thinking strategically about how to hold this moment. They should have thought, how do we incorporate some principles of unity within our organization so that young people who really care about climate change, really care, and are at homes where nobody's talking about racial justice, and schools are going to schools where they're not talking about equity, those people would learn how to center all of their work on those principles. That's what they should have done. And not co-opt our narrative, not use our young people as poster children. Now, I actually, even after saying this, love Sunrise. So that's what they're called, right? And I want to say that, but I have to be critical. And I have to be critical because, like them, there are so many groups popping up because they have an idea, and it comes from arrogance, it comes from a lack of humility, of how we work with each other in a very different way. And we need all hands on deck. So as lawyers, you're going to think, well, I've got the answers. This is what we need to do. This is how I'm going to help this community without walking into a community and saying, how can I serve you? What do you need, right? Well, what are some of the things that we're dealing with? Well, they're different depending on where you are in the country. If you're in West Virginia, you're dealing with mountaintop removal, right? If you're in Pennsylvania, you're dealing with fracking, or in LA. If you're in New York City, in our community, where we're really trying to take the industrial sector and repurpose it for green reindustrialization to basically create green manufacturing jobs, and we're trying to make sure that we are preparing for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, you're dealing with land use, you're dealing with zoning, you're dealing with creating special purpose districts that make it possible for you to operationalize a plan that decarbonizes the neighborhood. And that requires lawyers, because remember, everything we do is the distinction between may and shall. our rights are all lost in the little details, right? And so that's the way that you support us in this moment. Whether it's in a densely urban populated area like New York City, where all we have for water, for food sovereignty, for renewable energy is our rooftops, and how do we access those? How can we take the airspace? How can we use old laws that don't serve us anymore but have been resulting in our displacement, and how do we use them so that we are creating a body of law that is different? Procurement policies that are dated, right? If you're in New York City and you're trying to build something in the neighborhood, the cement might come from 3 boroughs away, right? Even though you've got 3 cement plants in your community, because the procurement policies are dated and don't include the impact of climate change. None, most of our legislation, most of our regulatory frameworks do not, right? So literally, the world for you is wide open in terms of what you can do. But how you do it and that process, if you want to be part of the climate justice movement, is different. So it's not going to be like when you're in Big Green and you come together with a bunch of lawyers and decide, this is the thing that we want to do right now. Let's go out and find clients. It's going to be, this is who we are, and people in our community finding you and saying, this is how we want to be represented. And that is the challenge. If you're from a culture of practice that is Western, that is extractive, that has been built on systems that have gotten us where we are right now. And so what is being asked is a lot. But if you really are concerned about climate change, and I do believe you are, or you wouldn't be here right now, you should be. It keeps me up at night. I think about how the only thing about being disabled that really pisses me off is the fact that I can't march, that I can't step up to people if I have to, use the cane, right? that has got me sitting like, can't move, right? In that way. But you're good. And so I want you to really sit with that, because if you leave here and there is no change in the way that you're thinking, and your heart isn't centered on the challenge and the threat that's in front of us, then I missed. I didn't do what I came here to do. Because to me, this is deeply spiritual work, because I can't help but see the future, and it is scary. It is really scary. And what is also scary is that we are birthing a new generation of people who are replicating processes and values that they learned from people who put us in this place. And so I need and want, as someone who comes from the front line, as someone who was born to struggle, that you rethink that process in your relationships with each other, in your relationship with money, in your relationship with institutions, and that you deconstruct that and then reimagine and create new systems that are going to get us to where we have to be. Everything from migration, if you're interested in immigrants' rights, is going to be impacted. Fossil fuel, and some of the things that we know, right? Like we know fossil fuel companies and government put power plants, landfills, highways, incinerators, and toxic infrastructure in communities of color. When I was the chair of the NEJAC, I kept talking about how we needed to think about places where all this infrastructure was and prepare it for extreme weather events. And I kept being shut down because environmental justice was siloed from climate justice. And then all of a sudden, Hurricane Andrew hits Houston, and all of those chemicals are dispersed into the air, into the ground, into everything, and people are having that conversation. All of a sudden, Hurricane Katrina hits New Orleans, and we're seeing the same thing. Hurricane Maria hits Puerto Rico, and 23 superfunds in that tiny island, on that colony of the United States, are all of a sudden dispersed with toxicity in the home, on the ground, in the aquifers, everywhere, right? But we were saying back then, we need to make sure, because we are going to have recurrent extreme weather events. This is before the IPCC report comes out. And we're saying we need to prepare. And we're not being listened to. And now we're being told we need to slow down. We need to slow down, and we need to look at things like carbon sequestration and green hydrogen. And the climate justice movement is saying, well, hell no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not turning our communities into sacrifice zones. Because the environmentalists care about climate, care about carbon, and those of us from justice also care about co-pollutants, and we need to do both. And so this is how we killed Waxman Markey. This is how we fought all of the senators when they pushed the IRA and said, oh, there's so much money for you. And we said, as much money as there is for our communities, there's also a lot of investments in false solutions and in the fossil fuel companies, giving with one hand and taking away from the other. So it means we need to know how to pass legislation. We need to know really locally how to get zoning laws passed that are going to be able to hold this moment. We need to federally know how legislation and resources are being allocated in our communities. We need to know all of the things. And lawyers know where all of those pieces lie. And so the folks that are leading these things in this climate, in the legal profession, have very narrow views about what you can do, what you can't do, and how long it's going to get us there. But climate change doesn't follow those rules. And so now really is the time for you to become more interdisciplinary, to really not work in silos, to really feel comfortable with the fact that the front line knows exactly what they need, and you're going to help us get there. And understanding how it shows up in all the different ways and not get distracted by ego and by opportunities that will make it possible for you to make more money but never make more change. I had choices when I was coming up. As the first in my family to get an education, my family expected me to make money. They were stunned and disappointed. What's wrong? I'm like, watch what we're gonna do. I remember when I first came to UPROSE and there was no funding. I had no funding at all. It was actually going to close. And my mom said to me, but you're a lawyer, don't you want to make money? I'm like, Mom, answer the phone. Watch what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go through the neighborhood. I'm gonna find out what people want. And then before she passed, I remember my mom saying to me, especially around Puerto Rico, you need to do everything that you can to make sure that people don't die in Puerto Rico. And we founded our Power PR to move the money and invest in frontline solutions and food sovereignty and infrastructure that was owned and operated by our communities there. And that came out of watching my mom cry and saying, you need to do everything, and believing that I could. She believed that I could. And the only reason I could is because I know people and I'm in community with people, and because this is a movement that is not iconic during the civil rights movement, like during the civil rights movement where you had one iconic leader, right? This is a leaderful movement. This is a matriarchal movement. This is a movement that is intergenerational, where one generation is learning from the other, and we're sharing information and ideas across the table, where the power isn't held by people who are elders or people who are young, but it is held in the collective. That's a very different way of thinking. So then one of us is sick because of COVID or whatever, or one of us steps out, another one steps up. This is a movement that is not following celebrity, the celebrity that your generation has been conditioned to. Whether it's on TikTok, or whether it's on Twitter, or whatever social media gives you joy in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. This is a movement that thinks of social media as a way of elevating the local narrative and using it as a political tool for organizing. And if you're an attorney that is dealing with climate change, you're going to have to understand organizing. And you're going to understand the intersectionality of all of the isms and how it shows up with climate change. So, things that we think about. Who's the most vulnerable when climate change impacts us? Well, clearly Black and brown bodies, but also our trans community. Those are the people that are most vulnerable and who are going to be the most impacted by climate disruption. And so, you have to make peace with the fact that the future really looks like us. 2042, we're the majority in this country. And what are we seeing happening in terms of migration in the United States? What we're seeing is really privileged people coming from other places and taking opportunities that were created by people who were historically marginalized. And while they should have access to those opportunities, they should not happen at the expense of those who are historically marginalized. That is the way that we're being pitted against each other. And we need to be able to reveal that. We need to be able to not have people tell our stories for us. Ooh, I'm sorry, perdona. And we also need to think about the fact that when people come to this country, they come to this country because they believe in the American dream. And the American dream is an extractive dream. It's a dream built on the blood of people who really built this country, right? I always say that this is indigenous land built by black people and sustained by immigrants. And that is my story. That's what I was thinking. People have told me, no, I'm an immigrant, I built this country. I'm like, no, you did not. You're sustaining it. So it's built by black people. So we need to have a story, a common story about that so that we can honor the people who are still holding that. And we can work with each other in a way that is radically different than the way that we've been conditioned to be with each other in community. And we have to, again, approach with humility. This is huge. Climate change is huge, right? And we need to know that the answers exist in us working with each other in teams, in collaborations, and that's where a lot of the brilliance comes out of. It wasn't surprising that during COVID, we knew that it was going to be our communities that were going to die. I know I lost 4 relatives in 2 weeks, and I almost went into cardiac arrest because I have all the health conditions that you have when you're born and raised in an environmental justice neighborhood. So we knew those would be the most impacted. And so we also know that when there's an extreme weather event, it's always going to be our communities that are going to be the most impacted. And that if you take care of the most vulnerable, you're literally taking care of everyone. And there are entire groups of people that are not prepared for climate change. Everything from first responders, like we're first responders, but first responders in the colloquial sense, in the traditional sense, emergency workers, hospitals, doctors, nurses, none of them are being trained to respond to recurrent extreme weather events. We've got engineers that are now thinking about how do we build so that we have the kind of infrastructure that prevents us from sea level rise and extreme heat. But they're not thinking about local communities. Instead, their response is managed retreat, without thinking about what managed retreat means for coastal communities, indigenous communities. Their response is building walls, which benefit the most privileged and not those communities that are outside of that. Their response is one to protect those people who have the power and the resources to get that protection. And the answers to how we build and engage in climate adaptation and mitigation is reclaiming ancestral knowledge. In California, it's indigenous people who know how to contain the fires because they've been doing it for millennia. And so there's knowledge in that. And that path of our ancestral knowledge is going to be what is going to make it possible for us to create different economic systems, different systems of scale, and a relationship with each other that is going to redefine what it is to be an American. And when I use American, let me just say this, let me be clear. To me, America is 35 countries that speak different languages, and the United States is just one of them. But I'm using it in this context to refer to the United States. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but that in fact is the fact. It's true. There's some arrogance in calling this country America when this is the United States of America. So we have to start thinking about displacement, about education, about all the things. In our organization, we do these learning circles about what do you do for 3 days if there is no water, no food, and no electricity. And that came out of watching what happened to the people in Push Buffalo during the freeze, and we saw black families die. And the community said to us, well, we can identify who in our building knows CPR, who's a teacher, who knows first aid. They came up with recommendations that have now shaped how we do the work. We have workshops on CPR, on stopping the bleed, all the things that are necessary as we're prepared for the apocalypse. And I know it's scary, but better than safe than sorry, right? So, mental health issues, hospital care, all of it has legal See, this is what happens when you're Puerto Rican, and you speak with your hands, you knock down mics. I shared this with the guy who mic'd me, there is a film that's coming out on the work that we did to stop Industry City from rezoning Sunset Park. It was a 7-year fight, and it was a rezoning fight. And it's called Emergent City, and you should see it. It is in Tribeca Films, and POV just picked it up for PBS. And there's a moment where I'm talking, and I didn't know I was mic'd. Oh my God, I was so horrified when I saw it at the film festival. So in Sunset, we're dealing with offshore wind, and what does that mean? It's the creation of a new ecosystem. And everybody's excited about it, but you know who's creating it? The fossil fuel companies, BP. Companies that have been responsible for extraction and for harming our communities are now embracing renewable energy because there's money in it. And so what do we have to do? We need to make sure that we're centering the just transition, that we are creating the kinds of agreements that are enforceable, that we're meeting with unions that are always on the other side of environmental justice, acting like we're not part of the rank and file, right? And making sure that we are centering a just transition in decision making. That when they hire, they're not just hiring all over, but that they're hiring locally, because if they're not hiring locally, if they're not hiring the place that was exposed to the environmental harm, and those communities don't have the environmental benefits, then it's not environmental justice. And we need lawyers to help us do that. And so from the very small to developing contracts, because you know, lawyers are trained to be transactional, to the very big, and looking at legislation and figuring out how do we make sure that the language doesn't protect fossil fuel companies and the resources are going there. You're expected to do all of those things. And we can only do that by sharing information with frontline communities all over the United States. So it's not easy, but it is doable, and we are doing it. We are doing it. We passed the legislation in New York. We're responsible for a lot of legislation across the country. And we are expecting co-governance from those legislators. And co-governance is this concept that our legislators are going to be educated by the front line, and regardless of where they are in terms of power, whether they're Senate, Congress, Assemblyman, or City Council, that they are held accountable to the communities that are impacted. So we're doing that too. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to open for questions, and I hope you have them. And I want to thank you de corazón, de corazón, for your attention and for the positive energy that I felt in the room. I can't see you because I'm vain, and I had to see the screen, and I can't put my glasses on and see you. I'll put them on now. But I want to thank you, and I want to welcome you into this work. I really want to welcome you into this work. And I want you to look to the elders in this movement for guidance and for centering and for grounding, and for the opportunity to sort of check yourself when you think you're heading in the wrong direction, because we all do. All of us are held accountable, and all of us are checked, because all of us make mistakes. And all of us have a heart that really is about justice and transformation. So I welcome you into that space with the hope that this is a path that you will walk with us before we walk through fire. So gracias.
This isn't our thank you. This is Q&A. Are there any questions? I hope there are. Jake.
Thank you.
You have to hold it right up.
You talked a little bit about it, but what is the best way to go about, you talked about places like West Texas where, there's a lot of people in power, and then also just other citizens who either deny that this is a big problem or just don't see it as any priority at all. And it seems like it would be a much easier fight if we all kind of agreed that it's a fight we all still need to have together. I mean, what is the best way to go about going into those communities and trying to convince more people that it's a fight we need to be having? Because it seems like there's too many still that don't understand that it's something we need to focus on. That seems to me to be like a big problem, I guess.
I think that's a great question, and I will say that they are not the majority. I don't engage deniers, it's a waste of time. But I think that what's happening across the country is that people are dealing with displacement, they're dealing with extreme policing, they're dealing with ICE raids, they're dealing with so many different things, and now we're asking them also to take on climate change. And so the idea really is to sort of not come to the conversation about climate change from a science place, but from a human rights place, from a public health place, from being able to make the connection between how climate change is going to exacerbate extreme policing, displacement, public health issues, because people care about that. When you talk to a parent who has children who have asthma about environmental justice, they immediately get it and see the connection, right? But they may be fighting for better schools or special needs or whatever, and that's their struggle. So you have to be able to deconstruct it and make it accessible so that people see the connection, and that's how you build a movement. You have to be able to be where people are and honor and respect the struggle that they're in and not judge it as if climate change is more important than displacement, not to the family who's been homeless, right? And I was displaced. I went to 5 schools in 8 years. So to the person who is displaced, the most important thing right now is putting food on the table and taking care of their kids. But if someone tells them that climate change is going to make that worse, they're going to pay attention. So you have to do that. The deniers, they waste our time and they slow us down. There are some people who are good with that, who can do that. I can't do that. I can't. I have decided we are not engaging at all. But, and if you have the ability, if you have the riz to be able to get to them, more power to you, right? I don't, not for them. I'm not here for them. So that's how you build. And then the mapping. We need to be able to do mapping to figure out where do we need to build, where are the people, and then not create new organizations, but find out what organizations exist. How do we hook them up with each other? Asking them, how do we provide you with resources? Can you use the services that I provide? So that we can start growing that resistance on the ground with institutions that have a history and are anchored in our communities, instead of bringing in the new, where you have to start building trust, right? So I think that's how you do it.
Other questions?
Sure. I feel, as students and young lawyers, I can anticipate us going into career opportunities, whether they're internships or jobs, that one, teach us how the system currently works, but two, potentially can cause us to buy into it, just by association, trying to figure out how the world works, being susceptible to the influences of those around us. How do you suggest that we find the right places to go to use our skill set in allyship? Or how do we bring the language of climate and environmental justice into heavily corporate and capitalistic spaces?
I'm sorry, but those are a lot of different questions. So first, I can tell you that when I hire interns, I get 2 kinds. I get the ones that are ready, they're like sponges, and they want to learn, and they want to serve. And then I get the ones that are haughty, that know everything, that want to tell us how to think, and are very narrow in the way that they're thinking. And I don't invest too much in them. I try, but I don't invest because they suck out my energy. And they haven't done the work, the internal work of deconstructing the systems that they're in, or see the value of working at an organization like ours. I think that they think that because we're grassroots, that somehow they come in with something that we don't have, and they don't realize that we've been changing the landscape. We've been doing all the things with little and almost no resources. There's a lack of humility, right? So what is your main responsibility as a lawyer? To be a critical thinker. So if you go into a space and you're not deconstructing it and you're not thinking critically about what works and what doesn't work for you, you have to land on what works for you. And you have to be honest. You have to be brutally honest. If your thing is to make money, is to get capital, you can do that anywhere. And you can sell your soul and be miserable. But if your responsibility is to be purposeful, if you want to be part of transforming how people think and changing infrastructure, changing all kinds of things, including how we create capital, how we thrive in the face of climate change, that's a different kind of lawyering. And you have to, you gotta be honest. People will say, oh, I'm gonna go work there for a few years so that I can get this and pay off my loans and do this and do the other thing. And then by the time you're done, you're what, 30, 35 years old. You kind of like set, right? And then you gotta sustain that life that you chose. You chose it. So it's a very personal decision. You know, I had to debate Rolling Stone, this guy in Rolling Stone magazine who was a green hydrogen guy. It was so bad that they had to turn the camera off because it got so bad. And he was trying to justify the extraction of green hydrogen. And I work with people that are in Indian country that are down from radioactive waste, that are breathing that in, where they've had generations die from cancer. I can't, as a movement builder, as an activist, support a policy or investments in something that is going to do further harm. And you can't convince me. So, but those are decisions that you make, and you have the power to do that.
We have time for one more.
Can we have
quick,
a woman?
One
A person
more
of color.
quick question. Woman, person of color.
No, you're gonna be quiet? Oh my God. Hurting my feelings.
Anybody? Forever hold your peace. No more questions.
Concerns? Lady in blue? I see your hand went halfway up, no? Okay, then we'll listen to the guys then. Go ahead.
One last question. All right.
This woman over here.
Abby has the. You have to hold the mic right up to your mouth.
Thank you for being here.
No, it's off. But you can project.
Here.
I
This
just want to
one.
say thank you for being here.
No.
And also, you need to all things. I just wanted to say thank you for being here today. And just curious to know, like, what is something you're most proud about in the work that you're doing with UPROSE or just in general in terms of the.
I get asked that question often and I never know what to say. I think, you know, because the organization really is intergenerational and some of the young people that started, when I started UPROSE were like 10, 12, 15. Some of them now run, like one of them who was 10 now runs the New York City Immigration Coalition. And to see leadership grow out of the organization, I think is really exciting. Like we have a young woman named Naisha Mallet who started with us when she was 14, and she's 22 now, and she's spoken at the COP, she's spoken at national conferences, she's led big marches like the People's Climate March that we had in 2017. Just recently she was on TV and I was home not expecting to see her on the screen. And when she started talking about how we would commodify nature, and she started talking about that stuff, and I was like, I wanted to cry, right? So, you know, we've done a lot of things that have been pretty amazing. I can't even believe that we've been able to accomplish them. And I'm certainly proud of all of the work. But I think for me, just personally, where the transformation has happened in the community, where there's climate justice consciousness, and where I'm seeing people using participatory budget processes in the neighborhood and saying to me, Elizabeth, we're gonna build a biosphere over there. And we see the pride. I think that gives me so much joy.
So on that note, I want to say thank you and say, I think you have truly inspired us. You have truly shown so much heart, love, sense of community, transformational change. And the beautiful part of being a lawyer, I always thought when I went to law school so many years ago, is you can do anything. There are so many different ways you can use your law degree. You can use law degrees for nonprofits, litigation, advocacy, public policy, academia, and you could be a movement lawyer and you could affect change on the ground level. So thank you, Elizabeth. If you'd like to meet with her, as I said, let me know. We have office hours. Please join us Thursday to hear more about just transitions. Thank you for all you do. also forgot to say, she went to law school here in Boston at Northeastern University, which is my alma mater. And she went to Fordham, a Jesuit institution for her undergrad. So thanks for being here, everybody. Elizabeth, thank you so much.